Welcome to The Test is History, a decorated deviation into Test cricket's finest and fiercest fought face-offs. This episode focuses on Test number 9, the only Test of 1882, between England and Australia, which took place at the Oval Cricket Ground, Kennington, from the 28th to the 29th of August 1882. Underarm or lob bowling was the bowling style in cricket's early years. In the late 18th century, David Harris, described by fellow cricketer and author John Nyren as masculine, erect and appalling, was the fastest of his day. George Brown, a father of 17 with limbs like tree trunks, who bowled underarm between 1819 and 1838, produced deliveries so quick that terrified long stops would strategically position bales of hay in front of them to prevent injury. Between 1847 and 1853, William Clark's underhand leg breaks accounted for an average of 340 wickets per season. But by that point, William Clark was something of a throwback. In the early 19th century, with batsmen enjoying increasing success, bowlers started to innovate with their actions. Round arm bowling, delivering the ball at or below shoulder height, was to become predominant, with John Willis of Kent a champion of the style. The story goes that it was his sister, Christiana Willis, who invented the round arm style when attempting to bowl to her brother in the garden. The size of her skirts prevented her bowling underarm, so she raised her arms slightly higher. In 1816, cricket's laws were changed to forbid round arm bowling. Previously, anything other than underarm bowling was considered ungentlemanly, but not illegal. Now umpires could no ball the round arm bowler. And in 1822, this happened, when John Willis bowled round arm for Kent against the MCC at Lord's. Willis threw the ball down, mounted his horse and rode away, never to play in a major match again. But round arm bowling was not going away. Willis continued as an umpire, becoming one of many who would turn a blind eye to bowlers raising their arm. In such a climate, two round arm bowlers, the fast-paced James Broadbridge and the slow-medium William Lillywhite, helped Sussex rise to become the unofficial champion county. George Knight, another round-arm bowler, who was also the nephew of the author Jane Austen, successfully led a campaign to legalise round-arm bowling. In 1828, the MCC changed the rules so that all bowlers could raise their arm to elbow height. Then, in 1835, round-arm bowling was permitted in the rules. It was a sweet victory for John Willis, who became a coach and discovered Alfred Minn, the Lion of Kent, probably the most renowned of all round-arm bowlers. But bowling arms continued to get higher, with the umpire's decision being finally enshrined in the rules in 1845. Many umpires used their discretion as bowlers began to deliver over shoulder height. Then in 1862, Ned Wilshire bowled overarm for All England against Surrey at the Oval and was no-balled by umpire John Lillywhite. Wilshire and 8 professionals walked off, causing play to be ended for the day. The law was changed again, permitting bowlers to do anything other than throw the ball, while round-arm bowlers, and more rarely underarm bowlers, continued to play first-class cricket in England. Overarm bowling was to become the norm. But in Australia, cricket was still developing. In January 1862, an English touring 11, led by H. Stevenson, played a New South Wales 22 at the Domain in Sydney. From beyond the boundary, an 8-year-old local boy called Fred observed that almost all the Australian bowlers bowled underhand. 2 years later, Fred returned to the same venue to watch another English team, this time captained by George Parr, and he was particularly impressed by the English round-arm bowler, George Terham Tarrant, who was bowling with tremendous pace. Fred vowed to bowl fast like Tarrant, changing his style from underarm to round-arm. The vigour and flurry of Fred's Catherine Wheel round-arm action earned him the nickname Legs and Wings at school. But with the legalisation of overarm bowling, Fred gradually raised his arm from horizontal to a high vertical action. As he reached adulthood, the lithe Fred Spofforth had grown to a height of 6 feet 3 inches tall. By the time W.G. Grace's English touring 11 were playing in Albert's Ground, Sydney, Fred Spofforth was part of the New South Wales 18 who they faced. Spofforth took 2 second innings wickets as New South Wales recorded an 8-wicket victory, but as he matured, Fred Spofforth adjusted his style, varying the pace of his deliveries. His lengthy run-up was followed by a high leap, his long, lean arms flying through the air like a human octopus, with his right hand almost touching the ground on follow-through. 4 years later, complete with a black moustache beneath his eagle nose and penetrative eyes, he was part of an Australian 11 who arrived on English shores and famously defeated the MCC at Lord's by 9 wickets. Fred Spofforth recorded match figures of 10 wickets for 20 runs. He was now known as the Demon Bowler. Although the Demon Spofforth was part of the 1880 tour of England, he missed out on the Test match due to injury, but by 1882 he returned for a 3rd tour. It was considered the strongest Australian side to arrive in England. The 1880 bowling attack of Spofforth, Boyle and Palmer were joined by 1878 tourist Tom Garrett and the 23-year-old South Australian all-rounder George Giffen, who had played in 3 tests against England in Australia the previous winter. Giffen, Hugh Massey and Sammy Jones joined the established batting lineup of Captain Billy Murdoch, Tom Horan, Alec Bannerman, George Bonner, Percy McDonnell and wicketkeeper Jack Blackham. The Australians played many matches between mid-May and the 28th of August when the Test match at the Oval had been arranged, picking up injuries on the way. McDonnell had been ill on the voyage and was out of sorts throughout the tour. Murdoch, Bannerman and Palmer all suffered from ailments. Spofforth started the tour slowly, but improved in form before a thigh injury in a game at Liverpool forced him out of several matches. But he had resumed playing by mid-August, in time for the Oval Test. England's preparations for the match were disrupted by their champion cricketer W.G. Grace suffering from the mumps in early season, the birth of his 4th child and his responsibilities as a GP were also taking their toll on the doctor. Several contenders for the England team had a preview of the Australians at the Oval in June. W.G., Bonnie Lucas, Monkey Hornby, Alan Steele and Charles Studd were members of the Gentlemen of England team, which suffered an innings defeat as George Giffen claimed 11 wickets for the Australians, demonstrating the formidable nature of their challenge. Injury to Fred Morley also meant England would be without a genuine fast bowler for the Test. Nevertheless, there were strong grounds for English optimism. Each England batsman boasted a higher average than their Australian opposite number. England's principal bowlers also possessed lower averages than their Australian counterparts. The Players' 11, which included George Ulliott, Billy Barnes, Maurice Reid and Ted Peat, defeated the Australians, minus Spofforth, by an innings on the 12th of August. The majority of the crowd who filled the Oval on the 28th of that month were anticipating an English victory. The teams lined up as so. Lancashire's Dick Barlow opened with W.G. Grace. In at 3 was Yorkshire all-rounder George Ulliott, becoming England's most capped player. 3 players from Cambridge University made up the middle order. Bonnie Lucas was at 4, wicketkeeper Alfred Littleton batting 5th, and Old Etonian Charles Studd, also of Middlesex, at 6. Maurice Reid of Surrey batted at 7. All-rounders Billy Barnes and Alan Steele batted at 8 and 9. Skipper Monkey Hornby started down the order at 10, and Yorkshire slow left armour Ted Peat made up the tail. For Australia, Alec Bannerman opened with Hugh Massey, a right-hander for New South Wales, described as an excellent field. Skipper Billy Murdoch was in at 3. The gigantic George Bonner was joined by Tom Horan in the middle order, with all-rounder George Giffen in at 6. Established wicketkeeper Jack Blackham was in at 7, fast medium bowler and the player with the most 5-wicket hauls for Australia in Test cricket, Tom Garrett, at 8, the highly rated medium pacer Harry Boyle at 9. With Joey Palmer injured and Percy McDonnell out of sorts, young Sammy Jones batted at 10. Making up the tale was the demon Spofforth. Billy Murdoch won the toss for Australia and elected to bat first. It was a gloomy day, but despite the clouds there were between 10 and 20,000 spectators at the Oval who cheered loudly as Monkey Hornby led out the English team, followed by Australian openers Bannerman and Massey. Ted Peat of Yorkshire, a slow left armer with an elegant action, opens the bowling for England. Peat had begun his career as a faster bowler and at the age of 19 travelled the country as a clown cricketer, performing alongside acrobats to larger crowds. He had honed his skills as a slow bowler during a winter job as a warp twister for Myers, practising in the shed bowling a bales of mungo. Ted Peat was on his way to a record 214 first-class wickets for the season and showcased his miserly accuracy while moving the ball away from the right-hander. At the other end, his Yorkshire colleague George Ulyott was less dependable but far quicker. Only 6 runs had been scored when Ulyott took out Hugh Massey's leg stump with a full toss. The Australian captain Billy Murdoch joined Bannerman and took Australia past 20. An hour had passed when Murdoch played a delivery by Ted Peat onto his stumps. He was out for 13. Peat had bowled 19 overs for just 7 runs. England skipper Hornby then made a bowling change, bringing on Dick Barlow for George Ulyott. Barlow's medium pace almost immediately accounted for George Bonner, taking out his middle stump for 1, leaving Australia on 22 for 3. 4 runs later, Alec Bannerman was caught brilliantly by W.G. Grace at point with a low left-handed catch off the bowling of Peat. It was 26 for 4. Tom Hurren was next to go, bowled on his leg stump by Barlow for 3. Then Peat bowls George Giffen to leave Australia in big trouble at 30 for 6. Jack Blackham and Tom Garrett seemed to be steadying the ship for Australia when Garrett was caught at long off by Maurice Reid off Peat for 10, with the total at 48. Harry Boyle had made just 2 when a ripper from Barlow took the top of his wicket. Sammy Jones was next in and rain began to fall for a few minutes. 6 more runs and Jack Blackham was out, skying a ball from Barlow to W.G. Grace, making the score 59 for 9. W.G. was providing an excellent fielding performance. Australia's Tom Hurren, who was to become an accomplished cricket writer, stated, "I do not think I have ever seen a better point than W.G. was on this occasion." When Sammy Jones was caught third man by Billy Barnes off Barlow for a duck, Australia were all out for 63, their lowest total of the tour and their lowest score by some distance in tests. The innings had lasted just 2¼ hours. Spofforth, who was left stranded on 4 not out, would later describe it as a sorry show. He continued, "I might speak for myself and say I was disgusted and thought we should have made at least 250. Dick Barlow's left-arm medium pace had produced figures of 5 wickets for 19 runs. Ted Peat had taken 4 wickets for 31. The crowd, which had swelled to 20,000, gave a triumphant cheer as England's openers, Dick Barlow and W.G. Grace, emerged to bat. Spofforth opens the Australian bowling with Tom Garrett at the other end. The England openers were watchful and had moved the score to 13 before the Demon made the first breakthrough. And what a breakthrough it was! Spofforth destroyed W.G. Grace's stumps with a Yorker, England's most famous batsman was out for just 4, but Spofforth was just beginning. WG's opening partner Barlow was next to go, caught by Bannerman at forward point for 11. The score was 18 for 2. George Ulyett and Bonnie Lucas attempted to rebuild the England innings. Ulyett lived up to his nickname of Happy Jack with some carefree shots. His risky strategy took England to 57 before he left his crease missing a Spofforth delivery. He was stumped by Jack Blackham for 26. Harry Boyle had replaced Garrett in the attack and picked up the wicket of Lucas, caught behind by Blackham for 9, leaving the score at 59 for 4. Charles Studd only lasted 3 balls, bowled by Spofforth for a duck. Alfred Littleton took longer over his 2 runs before he was caught by Blackham for Spofforth's 5th wicket. England was 63 for 6. They had at least equalled the Australian score. Maurice Reid, who had scored a century for the players in their victory against the Australians earlier in the month, was batting well, but the wickets around him were falling. Billy Barnes came in, scored a single, then hit a 4 before a breaking ball from Boyle bowled him to leave England on 70 for 7. Alan Steele made 14 before he played on to Garrett, making it 96 for 8. Monkey Hornby came in, curiously low in the order. A cut shot by Reid for 3 took England to 99 before Hornby brought up the 100 with a single. But then Spofforth produced a break back. It took out Hornby's leg stump, leaving England on 101 for 9. Ted Peat, a genuine tail-ender, lasted 2 deliveries before Spofforth removed him, caught by Boyle, the pioneer of the suicide silly mid-on fielding position, for no score. The Demon bowler had bowled through the innings, taking 7 for 46. England were 101 all out, a lead of 38, which in a low-scoring match seemed significant. That was close of play with 20 wickets falling on day 1. It was looking like the sort of match where one good score might make the difference. On Tuesday morning, it rained. This proved to favour the Australians, as the wet wicket would become easy for about an hour before drying out and becoming sticky. The greasy ball and slippery outfield also proved problematic for bowlers and fielders. This was the backdrop for Australian opener Hugh Massey to play the most significant innings of his international career. Perhaps inspired by George Ulyett's aggressive innings the previous day, Massey began to hit out, forcing Hornby to change the bowling around. It was an innings of risks. Massey was dropped at long on by Lucas on 38 off Barnes, but the gamble paid off, as Australia's deficit was wiped away in little over half an hour, with all 10 wickets still standing. Massey had made a run a minute 55 of the total of 66 when his leg stump was removed by a quick ball from Alan Steele. In the context of a low-scoring game, Massey's half-century had turned the match in Australia's favour, and the crowd applauded him back to the pavilion. But Massey's dismissal signalled that conditions were becoming tricky. George Bonner's middle stump was removed by Ulyett for 2, and Alec Bannerman, who had held up the other end while Massey threw the bat, was caught at mid-off by Studd off Barnes for 13. Australia was 70 for 3. Ted Peat bowled his naggingly accurate slow left-armers, moving the ball away from the right-handers. W.G. Grace moved in closer at point and snared 2 catches. First Tom Horan and then George Giffen were caught by W.G. off Peat. The wicket of Giffen made Ted Peat England's leading wicket-taker in Test matches. It also meant that WG had taken 4 catches in a Test match, the most at that point of any England player. Australia was 79 for 5. Wicket-keeper Jack Blackham joined skipper Billy Murdoch at the crease. Although runs were hard to get, they made 20 more before a rain shower caused the luncheon interval. Play resumed at 2:45 p.m. Without adding to the score, Blackham was caught behind by Littleton off Peat's bowling. It was 99 for 6. 21-year-old Sammy Jones came to the crease, helping Murdoch steer the total into 3 figures and past 110. It was at this point where some believe that the history of Test cricket pivoted. Steele bowled to Murdoch, who played it fine on the leg side. There was no fielder, so wicket-keeper Littleton had to retrieve the ball, and the Australians took an easy single. The ball ended up with W.G. Grace, who had been backing up when Littleton returned the ball. Sammy Jones had made his ground, and assuming the ball was dead, left his crease to pat down a divot on the pitch. W.G. Grace, who had held onto the ball, whipped off the bails and appealed. Jones was run out, to the outrage of the Australians, who considered it dirty cricket and sharp practice. No one was more indignant than the demon Spofforth, who had passed over the opportunity to run out Monkey Hornby in the England innings when he was backing up. Spofforth was next in and attempted to hit out but fell for a duck, bowled by Pete. There was no controversy over Murdoch's run-out dismissal, courtesy of a brilliant throw from the boundary by Studd. Alan Steele wrapped up the Australian innings, bowling Harry Boyle for naught. Australia had made 122 and set England a target of 85 runs. In the pavilion, Spofforth was livid. He stormed into the England dressing room, calling WG a cheat in a rant that, according to some accounts, lasted for 5 whole minutes. He told the English team that this would lose them the match, slamming the door behind him. The demon returned to the Australian dressing room and told his teammates, "This thing can be done." Out he went onto the pitch, pacing out his run from the gasworks end. The England openers emerged in bitterly cold weather and poor light. In this case, WG was joined by skipper Monkey Hornby. George Bonner, the giant Australian, one of the few men who towered above WG, greeted the England legend with some choice words of his own, as did Tom Garrett. England's innings began at 4:45. They made a good start with Monkey Hornby batting positively, but with 15 on the scorecard, Spofforth claimed his first scalp, bowling the England captain's off stump for 9. Hornby was replaced by his Lancashire opening partner, Dick Barlow. Spofforth clean bowled him first ball. It was 15 for 2. Spofforth was bowling flat out, forcing wicketkeeper Jack Blackham to stand back. George Ulliott joined WG in the middle, and as in the first innings, played with abandon. WG was also scoring with freedom, and they took the score past 50. With only 35 to get and 8 wickets remaining, the match looked to be heading England's way. Spofforth cut his pace, running in off 9 paces. Then Murdoch switched him to the pavilion end. With light worsening, Ulliott seemed intent on finishing the game, but swiped wildly to Spofforth, presenting a chance to Blackham, which was gratefully received. England were 54 for 3, needing 34 to win. The dismissal of Ulliott meant that Spofforth had become the leading wicket-taker in Test matches. He also had 10 wickets for the match for the second time, the first Australian to achieve this feat. Bonnie Lucas joined WG at the crease. England's champion had passed 30, and looked most likely to deny Australia victory. Harry Boyle came in from the Vauxhall end. Boyle was a clever bowler with great accuracy of length and a high action which made him deceptive in flight. His strategy was to tempt WG into a drive. A Boyle delivery dipped just short of half volley length and was hit to Alec Bannerman at mid-off, who took the catch. Boyle's plan had worked. WG was out for 32, it was 53 for 4, and England required 32 more runs. Alfred Littleton came to the wicket. Although Littleton quickly made it to double figures, the Australian bowlers soon began to strangle the scoring. John Masefield described it in his poem 85 to Win. 12 deadly overs followed without score. Then came a run. Then deadly maidens more. The run was a snick by Littleton off Boyle, which brought him to Spofforth's end. But this was part of Spofforth's plan. He had suggested a deliberate misfield so that the batsman would change ends and enable Spofforth to bowl at Littleton. The strategy worked. Spofforth bowled Littleton with a deadly off-cutter. England were 66 for 5, needing 19 to win. Frontline batsman, the 21-year-old Charles Studd, was curiously held back, and all-rounder Alan Steele was sent in. After Steele survived the last 2 balls of Spofforth's over, Lucas cut Boyle away for 4, bringing some relief to the crowd. The score had reached 70. England needed just 15 to win, but Steele was still at Spofforth's end, in the deteriorating light. Spofforth produced his slower ball, which deceived Steele, who hit it straight back to the Demon. Steele was caught and bowled by Spofforth for a 3-ball duck. It was 70 for 6, and Spofforth had his 4th 5-wicket haul in Test matches, an Australian record. In came Maurice Reid. He survived Spofforth's first ball, but the second took out his middle stump. It was 70 for 7, and Billy Barnes was next in. Charles Studd still waited, wrapped in a cold blanket to stop him shivering. Number 11 batsman Ted Peat used the champagne for England's anticipated victory as a nerve-soothing tonic. WG tugged anxiously on his beard. Barnes described walking into bat to face the Demon Spofforth as follows. As I got near Mr. Spofforth, he sort of fixed me. His look went through me like a red-hot poker. I walked along the wicket to the batting end, and halfway down something made me turn round and look over my shoulder, and there he was, still fixing me with his eye. Spofforth were no bowler, he were a hypnotist, and in all fair sport to have been made to bowl in smoked specs. Billy Barnes hit a 2 off the final ball of Spofforth's over. Then there were 3 byes, leaving England with 10 to win. Bunny Lucas had been solid in defence and survived the first 3 balls of the next Spofforth over, but on the 4th he played the ball onto his stumps. He had faced 55 balls and scored 5 runs. England was 75 for 8. Studd's long wait was over. He was next in, but it was the end of the over, and he was at the non-striker's end. The Australians gathered together to make their plans. It was Harry Boyle's turn to bowl. He bent over to dust the ball in the sawdust, turned and ran in from the Vauxhall end. On releasing the ball, it hung in the air, turned and lifted. Barnes was not far forward enough. It struck his glove and looped up to Billy Murdoch at point. Boyle had picked the perfect moment to bowl his perfect delivery. England was 75 for 9. Tail-end batsman Ted Peat came in at number 11. While the competent Charles Studd was stranded at the non-striker's end, yet to face a ball. Hornby's readjustment of the batting order had backfired. Peat managed to play the ball with the spin to the outfield. The English batsman ran 2. Studd might have considered setting off for a single, putting himself on strike, but runs were too precious. England were now 7 runs behind. Peat missed the next ball from Boyle. The tension in the crowd was as heavy as the sky, the mood in the English dressing room as gloomy. It was 10 to 6 as Boyle prepared to deliver the final ball of the over. What happened is described by John Masefield as follows. Boyle took the ball, he turned, he ran, he bowled. All England's watching heart was stricken cold. Peat's whirling bat met nothing in its sweep. The ball put all his wickets in a heap. All out, with Studd untried, our star had set. All England out, with 7 runs to get. Australia had won, and were the first team to defeat England on home soil. The tension was sadly too much for one onlooker, who dropped down dead. But elsewhere, the crowd's shocked gasps quickly gave way to rapturous applause, acknowledging the significance of Australia's victory. The spectators poured onto the pitch, raising Boyle and Spofforth shoulder high to the pavilion. Boyle had been the perfect foil for Spofforth, taking 3 for 19 in the second innings. He had not only taken the crucial wickets at the death, but also removed England's top-scoring batsman, W.G. Grace. Spofforth had taken 14 wickets in the match. His second innings figures of 7 for 44 included the final 4 wickets for just 2 runs. It remained an Australian record against England for 90 years. The Demon Spofforth's performance cemented his status as an icon of Australian pride, destined to forever send a chill to the bones of all English cricket lovers. The English players entered the Australian dressing room, presenting cups of champagne, seltzer and lemon mixers for the victorious team. The crowd chanted each Australian team member's name, mobbing the team as they left the ground. Women waved handkerchiefs from windows as the Australian team made their way down Kennington Road back to the Tavistock Hotel. For England, the post-mortem was prolonged and serious. Losing the match with the lowest aggregate score of any Test match to date led to questions over team selection, Hornby's captaincy and the timidity of some of England's batting, particularly Littleton. Pete also came in for criticism for not blocking Boyle's delivery to give Studd the strike, but his lack of faith in Studd's ability to get the runs seemed to be shared by Captain Hornby, who had sent in the debutant at number 10. And perhaps Pete's actions could be excused after he had seen how the other English batsmen had fared against Spofforth and Boyle. As W.G. Grace bluntly stated, "I left 6 men to get 30-odd runs, and they could not get them." However, WG's riling of the Australians with the controversial running out of Sammy Jones meant he could not escape censure. The 9th ever Test match is immortalised in folklore. Neville Cardus described it as the greatest and most famous of all tests, but the match left another legacy. In the aftermath of England's defeat, the Sporting Times printed a spoof obituary penned by Reginald Shirley Brooks. It read, "In affectionate remembrance of English cricket, which died at the Oval on 29th of August 1882, deeply lamented by a large circle of sorrowing friends and acquaintances, R.I.P. The body will be cremated and the ashes taken to Australia." The following autumn, new English captain Ivo Bligh set off to Australia, promising to recover those ashes. After England had won the 3rd Test of that series, some Melbourne women presented a small urn to Bligh as England's captain. A label was pasted onto it with a 6-line lyric from the Melbourne Punch. It read, "When Ivo comes back with the urn, Studs, Steele, Reed and Talcott, return, return. The welkin will ring loud, the great crowd will feel proud, seeing Barlow and Bates with the urn, and the rest coming home with the urn." It was a gift that Bligh would treasure. Thereafter, England and Australia would play their Test series for the Ashes.